Good morning, everyone. That has been a great foundation on which I can start. I hope you all have this on your chair. I hope many of you looked at it on the website and were able to contribute. We had a lot of contributions, and I hope what I'm going to present now is as much what other people contributed to the draft as the original draft. It has changed substantially, which I'm actually very pleased about. I don't really need to talk a lot about the Millennium Development Goals, except that they're an avenue towards where we are now. The MDGs were developed to bring together as a consensus for a direction for development between 2000 and 2015. Obviously, we're approaching 2015, which is why we're now thinking about a second phase. A lot of organizations decided that the MDGs were going to be the basis for their agenda and their strategy during that period. And that's great. It was really important that there was a consensus, if we were going to achieve anything, that people were working together towards the same aims. They were targeted, and a lot of resources were directed on the basis of these MDGs. The problem, though, is that if you're not a part of what is commonly considered as a consensus for joint work, you can be more left out than if there hadn't been any common consensus for joint work. That was a complaint of a lot of people within the movement, to use it in a very broad sense, of people who are involved in mental health globally. But I think actually it didn't matter very much, and that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit later. A lot was achieved. Particularly the one that was announced fairly recently as having been properly achieved and completely achieved was around water and sanitation. The proportion of people who have access to clean water now is on target compared to how it was in the year 2000. But also, as we heard yesterday from Alan Lopez, huge achievements have been made in taking people out of poverty, in child mortality particularly. Half as many children now die before the age of 5 as they were previously, as proportionately. And in primary education, universal primary education has been huge achievements. So they've been very successful in what they're aiming to achieve. But where did mental health fit into this? Well, it was pretty obvious from the perspective of people who are aiming to have a specific mental health component. That didn't happen. And I think that's largely because we weren't where we are now in terms of a global movement 20 years ago. We weren't in a position to be able to strongly advocate for mental health to be as large a part as it has been, is going to be this time, I think. This was also exemplified as the non-communicable diseases community got together and had a high-level summit, only the second high-level summit on health after HIV and AIDS, around non-communicable diseases. And actually, the mental health movement hadn't been a part of that process going up until they had the summit. But actually then, within the last year or two before it, we were really well organised in getting a position and point in there for mental health that wasn't there before. Despite the fact there was no specific mental health component of the MDGs, an enormous amount has been achieved. And I think that's one of the things that we need to understand and learn for what we're going to be asking for in the post-2015 MDGs agenda. It's that we want to be a part of other people's agendas, to be incorporated into the work that other people are trying to achieve. That's non-threatening. It's in principle the right thing, because we are a part, mental health is a part of what everyone else is trying to achieve anyway, as opposed to being a vertical, separate, siloed component of development. We're a part of the development movement and integrated into what other people are doing. The list in the second half of this slide there, I think is where we are now, and we weren't necessarily before. A lot of that has just been about bringing together bits of work that different people were doing, being able to present it better. I think some of the Lancet series and those kinds of pieces of work have done that very well. Actually, we're not a highly technical health discipline where new drugs are very important, or we have new techniques. Actually, it's largely about doing what we know how to do in simple ways more effectively and being more able to be accessed by more people. A lot more resources are available now than they were before, particularly, I think, successfully in research. It's also happening. I certainly find it much easier to find money than I used to in terms of program development and implementation, but there's particularly a large amount of money available that wasn't before in terms of research. These are some of the publications that have come out of that in the last 15 years. So I don't think there'll be any surprise here. The typical situation in the low-income countries where we work, I recognise that the movement isn't just about low-income countries. In fact, 3/4 of the poor people in the world live in middle-income countries. So I think it's great that some of the responses that we heard about from Alex earlier said that all countries need to be involved in this. We need to carry along people with mental health problems in high-income countries too. There isn't enough funding for mental health, and if we're going to scale up services, we need to scale up funding. Services are currently based in large institutions, which are inaccessible to lots of people and are sadly often very abusive themselves. People suffer stigma and discrimination, and often that's incorporated into law. It's official. And it's only this year that the British Parliament repealed a lot of laws that actively stopped people who have a history of a mental health problem from being judges, from being parliamentarians, from being board directors, and from various other official roles in society. So it's only just happening even in the UK. I don't know if you can read this here, but this is a temple in Bali, which specifically is saying mad ladies and gentlemen are not welcome. So it's also in social and religious circles that we have this. And at the moment, we live in a world where the people themselves who have these problems, who identify themselves as service users, don't have very much say in the services that affect them. This is the big issue that we need to deal with, and is our strongest argument in many ways for the post-2015 agenda, which is that poverty and mental ill health are inextricably linked. And development is not going to happen unless we deal with the issue of mental health. So it seems strange, but I'm going to go back very quickly to before the Millennium Development Goals, to a Rio Declaration in 1992 that is very similar to some of the things Harry was talking about sustainable development and being in harmony with nature. We are in a slightly strange situation that there are two separate movements, strands, towards the post-2015 development goals. There are the Sustainable Development Goals, which came out of the Rio Plus 20 Years conference, which was much more focused on the environment, but also about development. And then the UN system started a long consultation process around what are the post-2015 development goals going to look like. Thankfully, there is a plan, and the expectation is that they will be brought together to have a common set of goals. There won't continue to be a separate one, but it's to a certain extent a reflection of a very positive strengthening of the BRICS countries, and strengthening of the economies of a lot of middle-income countries. So the whole agenda is no longer set just by wealthier countries. So that's a positive thing. There is an aim to bring them together and work together on that. Harry's already mentioned the high-level panel of eminent persons. And that was a very important report that came after a lot of work and a lot of consultation, especially through UNDP. And we've incorporated those 5 big transformative shifts that he's talked about into the piece of paper in front of you. What they said was that MDGs did a lot. They really achieved a lot. And we're not going to throw all that out and start again. That we need to carry on the good work of the MDGs and focus on a few areas where they didn't really achieve what we wanted to achieve. The most important of those probably is around equity. It's about vulnerable people being brought up as well, not just having targets that are average achievement, which of course the low-hanging fruit, the people who are already almost there, are the ones that are likely to be pushed up into achieving the development we want. We need to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind. Environment is very key, and that's why the Sustainable Development Goals from Rio are very central to this, that we can't just have development at the expense of the environment, particularly with global warming. And that economic progress is recognised, and that's universally recognised really, is the easiest way to bring the majority of people out of poverty. So we still believe in capitalism. Some people do. So where does health sit in this post-2015 agenda? There's a very important report written about what health, what the priorities for health are going to be. It probably isn't going to have so many specific targets related to health as were in the first one, but health is still going to be very, very important. Recognizing the demographic shifts and the lifestyle shifts that Alan Lopez talked about yesterday. So there's going to be some focus more on NCDs particularly, but mental health is definitely up there. And some of the injuries and violence as cause of problems that have been identified recently is going to be more integrated in there. There's going to be a strong human rights approach. So not just talking about average benefit, but also making sure everyone is able to access these benefits, these changes. It's got to be system-wide and intersectoral, which we've heard a lot about as well. Evidence base has got a stronger, clearer point being made about it as well. A life course approach, and these are all some of the things that people fed into our first draft of the position statement. And also talking a lot more about social determinants of health and not just health services. On the basis of what I've talked about, mental health is there, but we've got to make sure it's right. And I think we're in a very good position as a movement to be able to be the voice that has at least part of the argument for how it should look. So we decided to put together a draft of a position statement for the movement for global mental health around the post-2015 MDGs, really following on from some of the work that's been done in other areas like disability, where they've had some real success in getting their messages across, to help our members to be able to argue consistently around what they want to see in the post-2015 agenda. So this is put onto the website and circulated in the email system, and we had some good responses. The time was very short. We had 54 really constructive responses which were incorporated into this draft. The great majority of them were incredibly positive. Some of them were very short and positive and just said, this is great. And a lot of them said that and then had some suggestions as well, which is a really nice way to work. As always, most people said it should be shorter and briefer and more to the point, and then suggested 10 other things that I should add into it. That's always the case. There was a whole question about, is it a position statement? Is it just something that people can use as a resource? I think we are pretty clear that we cannot claim that this is an official statement from all members of our movement. And that's one of the weaknesses of having a movement, but also one of the realities. And I see it much more as a resource that our members can use, rather than saying that all of our members have to stand by this statement. And I don't personally even mind if they want to adapt it for their particular use in their particular countries. We based it as much as possible on the kind of consensus and of evidence base around mental health. There has been some work that's already been done, something called the People's Charter, which was largely around the World Federation for Mental Health, which came up with some ideas that we incorporated. It wasn't only mental health groups. There were various people who sent comments in from broader NGO type groups, not just mental health. And we wanted to really push the idea that we're not fighting our corner. This isn't mental health at the expense of everyone else who wants to have something in post-2015 development agenda. This is us wanting to work constructively with other people within that agenda. The second major area that people commented on was what was the focus of what we want to do. The title was the first thing that people suggested we changed, which is okay. No health without mental health has become a really good rallying cry, I think. People recognise it, people understand it, it's very clear what it means. But we decided to put it slightly further down. So it is there, but we changed the title from No Development Without Mental Health to Mental Health being an essential part of achieving sustainable development. The economic argument was recognised as really important, I think particularly for politicians who have to make difficult decisions. Economic arguments are very important, and the evidence base around that is growing, so we've put that in there. Social inclusion was emphasised by several people, and we've increased that, and that's a part of the 5 essential changes as well. It has to be about action, not just words, and that's difficult because this is words. So we're going to rely on our members to do the action part of it, but that was a point that several people made. There's lots of pieces of paper around. What are we going to do to make sure this one isn't just a piece of paper and actually has some implementation around it as well? And also several people said, look, if governments are going to carry on bombing people, we can't talk about mental health because government shouldn't be bombing people because that's not very good for mental health. So we tried to put something there around having, I suppose it's promotion and prevention, but having an environment in which there is less damage to mental health in the first place. People talked about the services that we want to promote being integrated into NCDs, being very community-based. Cultural appropriateness was talked about a lot, and it should be universal, incorporating people who are working in the non-governmental sector as well as service users. People said, some of these I've mentioned already, they should be culturally contextual. Violence and trauma wasn't talked about much, both at a kind of national disaster level, but also domestic and gender-based violence and child abuse, and that's really important, and we've incorporated that as well. Drugs and alcohol hadn't been mentioned much, or HIV/AIDS. All of those suggestions I've incorporated because they made it much better than what we came up with, which is even the first draft was a consensus among a group of people in the kind of advisory body of the movement. But it's much better now. And I don't think this is necessarily the last draft either. What we would like to do is to discuss here, and we'll certainly take notes, and if necessary, make some more changes and changes in emphasis particularly. I don't want it to become much longer. I think being brief and to the point is really important. But what we would like to do is, having come up with that kind of later draft, to make it available on the website, and potentially perhaps the email to see if people are happy with that draft, and then make it available as resource for other people. The important thing, though, is how we use it. There's lots of very good position statements, lots of very good pieces of paper, but I think it's now up to the membership to take it within their own organisations and within the advocacy work that they're doing. And only that way, I think, can we really come to having a real impact on this. But it's an exciting opportunity for mental health in the post-2015 development agenda. Thank you.